friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Berry Special Garden Before and Afters, A Creature Was Stirring, and A Bug Deal. So I stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be choosing my colors based on our new Lawn Fanatics Challenge. It is a photo and color inspiration board. I'm specifically going to be using the colors that you saw there on the right hand side. And so I'm going to start with my mice. There was some gray in that color palette, so I decided to go with gray mice for today, but I wanted them to be pretty pale, so I went with W00 and W1. I'm laying in some shadows with that W1, blending that out with the W00, and then letting that fade into the white. I did go back and add a second layer just to increase that saturation and give me a little bit of a darker shade on this first little guy. And then I'm going to be coloring the girl mouse. She is from A Creature Was Stirring, so that is a Christmas set, but I'm going to be using her to create a springtime card. I think she looks super cute in her little apron. And I'm coloring her with her shadows reversed from the first guy since she's facing in the opposite direction. So the shadows go down the back of the body, and that keeps their faces nice and light and highlighted. While I have those markers out, I'm going to take the W00 and just add a little bit of shading to some of the smaller flowers so that they look white, and I'm just concentrating that color right up close to the center of the flower. And then I'm also going to do the seed packet in white. So I went back to the W1 and then I'm blending toward the center with the W00. I'm doing my shadows on both the left and the right. And then I wanted to bring in some pinks. I'm using RV10 and RV11. I'm going to color in the mice's noses with the RV11, and then I'll do their ears with both shades and also use both shades to give them some rosy cheeks. And then I wanted to carry that color over to some of the flowers as well. So I'm going to start with the largest flower in the longer flower beds, putting that RV11 closest to the center and then blending toward the tips of the petals with that RV10. And I did go back and do a second layer on that as well with that RV11 just to beef up that saturation since I only used the two shades. But that's an extra step that you can choose to do or not. I just think it really adds something. And then I'm going to do the flower centers of the flowers on the ends of that longer flower bed in those shades as well. And I did go back and add a touch more of that RV11. And then I wanted to have something be just a bit darker. So I pulled in the RV13 and I'm going to do the label on the seed packet. Again, doing those shadows on the left and the right, so it'll be nice and even with the highlight down the center since that seed packet is completely facing forward. And then I decided to brighten up the flowers with a touch of that RV13 as well. So I added it again to those centers and then to the very edge closest to the center of the larger flowers. So the blue that is in the color palette for the challenge is a darker blue, so I decided to use that to give my little mice some denim overalls and a little denim apron. So I went with B95, B97, and B99. And I started with that B99 and did my shadows with that and blended out with the B97, and then I'm using the B95, and I decided to add in the B93 as well just because they were looking a little bit dark and I wanted a bit more of a highlight on that right side of his overalls. And then I'm going to do the little girl's apron to match. Denim is a nice sturdy fabric for working out in the garden, and it just kind of brings her completely out of that Christmas looking theme to have that little bit of a jean apron on her. So I just again reversed my shadows and put my highlight on the left to match where I have it on her body. And then for the kind of dark gray that is in that color palette, I decided to use that for the flower beds and the flower pots. As if you go to a garden center, usually the plants that you buy and come in these black plastic containers. So I decided to represent that using W3, W5, and W7. So I'm putting my shadows again on both the left and the right, just like the seed packets. I used the W7 for that, and then I blended that out with the W5 and used the W3 for a highlight. But the W3 really pushed the W5 back a bit, so I did go in with a little more of that W5 and then blended over just the edge of that with the W3. And I'm going to do all of these exactly the same to match. I'm going to do the longer ones and the regular flower pots as well. I just wanted to keep them all consistent since that color palette only has the 5 shades in there, and I wanted to save the more spring-like colors for the plants themselves. So I decided to just go with being very neutral for all of these flower pots so that the flowers, would really be the ones that kind of shine with the bright colors. And then of course the mice and their cute little denim overalls as well. But the more spring-like colors, the pastel pink and the pastel yellow, those I'm going to reserve for the flowers. I don't know about you guys, but I am so beyond ready for spring. I'm ready for planting and visiting the garden center and picking out vegetables for my garden and flowers for my yard. But we are still completely covered in snow here. We just had another winter storm. It snowed for 3 days straight, so it still looks very much like winter here, and I won't be going to the garden center anytime soon, but I'm just so longing for the bright, thriving, growing season that spring brings. I'm so over the cold winter weather, but have to be patient a little bit longer. I am going to ask my husband to build me another container garden. I already have one, but I'd like to add and plant a few more vegetables because normally I plant a lot of tomatoes and they really take over the container garden. With all the vines, I have to cut them back all the time. So I thought if I had a second one, that will give me some room to kind of expand and plant a few more different varieties of things. So I'm really looking forward to that this spring and summer. I just love growing my own produce, and I also have a little herb garden. I do that in pots on my deck now, and I really, really just love going out to the garden or to the little herb pots and picking fresh herbs and fresh vegetables to combine in my meals. So I'm moving on now to the yellow combo that is in that color palette. And I decided to go with some yellows that are pretty new to me, and that is Y02, Y06, and Y08. They're more of like a pure yellow, whereas the Y teens that I usually use have a bit more of an orangey tone to them. So this did match that little heart that was in the color palette a bit more. So I started just like I did with the other flowers, with the darkest close to the center, and then blended out toward the edges. And then I went back to the Y08 again in the very closest to the center of the flowers to just darken that up a bit and make it a bit more contrasted. And then I'm going to do the remaining centers of the flowers in those longer flower beds. and I'll also do the flower petals on the ends, but I skipped over the Y08 for those. I started with the Y06, and then I'm blending out with the Y02 just to give me like another shade, so it's a little bit different from the rest of the flowers, and especially from that biggest flower. And then just like with the others, I went back with that Y06 and just added a touch more to the inner edge of those petals. The largest flower I wanted to resemble a sunflower, so even though there isn't brown in that color palette, there is some brown in the photos that are also optional to use for this inspiration challenge. So I decided to pull in E44, E47, and E49 to do the center of that flower, and then I'm also going to do that pile of dirt up at the top with these shades. So I just started with the E49 down at the bottom, and then I'm blending that out with the E47, and I'll use the E44 at the top. And I'm going to repurpose that a bit later on. You'll see what I mean when I get to that part. But for the green combo, I decided to go with G21, G24, and G28. So I'm going to do all of the leaves of the plants with these shades. And I started with the G28 closest to the stem on the leaves. I'm also going to do the stem on that sunflower with those shades. And then I'm blending out the G28 with the G24 as the mid-tone, making sure to save some room on the end of each leaf for that G21. And I'll just pull that color in to blend everything out nicely, but I still want to keep that bit of contrast with the G28, so I'm making sure not to go over that part so that it kind of stays with that bit of contrast there. And then for the other two plants, I'm going to add the G28 to the edge of each petal. I think these look really cute. They remind me of succulents, but they could be any plant that's kind of in the first stages of growing. And then I'm just blending out with the other two shades for that as well. For the watering can, I decided to go with a brighter kind of yellow green. I chose YG01, YG03, and YG05, and that's just because that's the color of my watering can, or one of them anyway. I have one that kind of looks like this. It's a little bit slimmer and sleeker than this, but it is this color. And then I have another one that is shaped like a gnome, and it's blue. They're both fun. I usually fill up both of them because I have a lot of plants to water, so I take two at once around my yard. So I just colored that with the shadows on the outer edges and the highlight in the center to make it look round. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'm going to be using the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil to create a nice sky. I'm going to use tumbled glass because I felt like it matched the blue in the denim the best because it's more of like a pure blue. It's not blue-green or blue-gray. So I'm going to use this to create my clouds by just turning that stencil until I get a different cloud formation each time and then blending over the edge of that. I'm using firmer pressure with those mini ink blending tools right as I leave the stencil, but then quickly lightening up so that it kind of fades into that white space and I get a nice kind of dreamy, hazy look. So I'm just going to continue working my way down this panel. I'm not sure how much of it is going to end up being covered, so I wanted to make sure to bring that down as far as I could and then just add a bit of color down at the bottom so it's not so stark white. Then I'll press some of that ink onto an acrylic block, water it down a bit, and then I'll pick that up with a fine paintbrush and I'm going to tap it against the edge of that acrylic block so I get a nice fine spray of splatters. Once I'm happy with how that is looking, I'm going to set this panel aside to dry and grab another strip of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. This one I'm going to use for the grass. I'm going to start with some twisted citron down at the bottom of this panel, just blending that the entire way across. And I'm being pretty heavy-handed with that because I want it to be nice and bright. And then I'm going to use some Lucky Clover. I wanted to pick something that was really bright and more blue toned to kind of match with the blues that are in the coloring. And then I'll have to work my way over the transition area of those to get them to blend nicely. And I went back and forth over both of those a couple of times until I had a look I was happy with, but I ended up really liking how these colors blended together. And I'm going to do some splatter detail on these as well, just to help it all look very cohesive. So I'm going to press some of that twisted citron onto the block first. I like how the oxides, the lighter colors really stand out on the darker, and I think it gives it a really cool look. And then I'm going to use that Lucky Clover as well and splatter that over the entire background so you get more of that contrast on the lighter part of the green as well. So once I have enough splatters on there so it looks how I want it, I'm going to set this panel aside to dry completely so that I can die cut it. And I'm going to use the Lawn Fawn grassy border for that. And I'm just going to keep the entire portion of the twisted citron and then just take that up a bit so that I get a bit of the Lucky Clover in there as well, and all of the fade area. Then I'll pop the sky portion in my Misty so I can stamp my sentiment using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I'm using the sentiment that says, "Friends are flowers in the garden of life." That is one long sentiment, and I did snip it in half. I hardly ever do that, but it just worked so well for this scene, and I can always put it back together the way it's supposed to be. Then I'm going to stamp on the inside of my card. I've created a card base using some MFT snow cone cardstock. I'm going to take one of the little mice from Dandy Day, and the sentiment and the plant, the flower, are from the garden before and afters. I'm stamping those down in Blue Jay ink, and I'm stamping them down twice to make sure I have a good impression using my Twiddler's Nook Pressure Pal. And then I wanted to add in some pattern paper from the Flower Market 6x6. So I'm going to go through and choose one. I was going back and forth between a couple different ones, between the pink and the yellow mainly. But in the end, I decided to go with the yellow. So I'm going to tear that out, and I'm going to trim it down with the large stitch rectangle stackables. And I'm also going to cut down 2 very thin strips of ballet slippers cardstock from Lawn Fawn. So once I have all of those elements ready to go, I'm going to start assembling my card. I'm going to glue that pattern paper down to cover the entire card front using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, just making sure that all 4 corners are lined up correctly. So just doing that and then smoothing that down in place. I didn't have it on there quite right, so I did pull that up quickly and adjusted that. And then I'm going to add my grassy border to my cloud border, just gluing that down at the bottom of that panel. So I'll have a focal panel that runs the full length of the card but is just shorter, just for a different look, something I haven't done in a really long time. So I'm going to add that right in the center of the card, and then like I said, I have those 2 thin strips of the ballet slippers cardstock. So I'm going to use that little fine nozzle of my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, and I'm going to glue one down right below that focal panel, and then the other I'm going to add right above it to kind of frame it in on the top and the bottom. And that way I can kind of emphasize those softer spring colors in this color palette to really make my card look fresh for spring. So then I have my images that I'm going to start to add in. I'm going to begin with this sunflower, and I'm going to tuck that in behind the grass, right between the two parts of that sentiment, and just make sure it's nicely centered, and then press that down into place. And then the two longer flower beds I'm going to add on either side of that, kind of lined up right below each part of the sentiment, so everything is really nice and balanced, which is something I love to have in my scene cards. So just making sure that those are on the same level as each other. And then I'm going to add a little flower pot with the succulent or the little green plant that's still growing on either side of those on the end. Again, keeping everything pretty balanced there. And then I'll mix it up a little bit with the other accessory images. I'm going to take this dirt pile and I'm going to cut that into a couple pieces. I'm going to have it spilling out of one of the pots, so I'm going to just glue those two together so it looks like that pot has toppled over and is laying on its side. So I just held that together until that glue set. And then the other empty pot I'm going to fill with some of that dirt as well. So I'm just trying to find a portion of it that looks natural, like it's popping up out of that pot. And then I'll trim that down and glue that one behind that pot as well. And this time I'm just going to have a tiny bit of that dirt sticking out because this is the pot that the two mice are going to be planting in now. So that one is going to go right in the center below that sunflower, just a little bit lower than that. And then I'll have the mice on either side of that. Like I said, I'm going to work quickly with them because I want them each to be holding something, and so I want to get them spaced correctly, far enough back from that pot so that the objects that they're holding have room, but also close enough that it looks like they're actually planting. So the girl mouse is going to get the seed packet, and then the boy mouse is going to get the watering can. So I'm actually going to do the watering can first so I can get that kind of position where I want it. And then I can add the mouse so it looks like he's kind of lifting that up and pouring that water in. And then my other pot is just going to go on the left-hand side behind that mouse, just for like one little thing that's out of balance, just to make it, you know, a little bit more natural looking, I guess, like a normal scene. Not everything is perfect in life, but I do like to have that balance in my scenes, especially with the way the sentiment is proportioned. So the last thing to do is add a bit of sparkle. I'm going to take my Stickles glitter glue. This is the Stardust Stickles, and I'm going to add it to the centers of all of my flowers, including the large sunflower. On the larger flowers, the two pink flowers and then the sunflower, I'm just adding a little bit toward the right hand side, and then for the other flowers I just kind of put a dot on to fill it in completely since they were a lot smaller. And that is going to finish off this card. I didn't want to get too carried away with the stickles, so just enough so that it really catches the light when you tip it. And then I'll give you another peek at the inside as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have everything listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also be interested in. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.